Hi, I'm a Fork, and welcome to a quick beginner's guide to the Cycle Frontier, one of my favorite games that's out right now. This guide is going to walk you through some of the basics of the game that the game itself might not teach you. This is by no means a complete walkthrough of the game, but instead aims to provide some quick but helpful information that I wish I was told before I started playing. Let's do it. Right off the bat, you'll be dropped into a quick, skippable tutorial phase where you can get a basic understanding of the game mechanics. Take your time, run around, get a feel for how the game flows. But while you're in here, make sure you get your settings in order, starting with your sensitivity. At the end of the day, it's all preference and it's all based on what you're used to. The sensitivity that you're used to playing on is going to be the best sensitivity for you. So my only recommendation for tuning your sensitivity to you is to match it to previous games you've played and are comfortable with. To do this easily, there's a website I recommend called mouse-sensitivity.com. This is not sponsored or anything, but their link will be in the description for you to use. And this tool allows you to put in your sensitivity and DPI from one game and convert it to another game. Although it's not perfect, I've found that it is extremely close and has saved me so many hours in multiple different games just trying to match my sensitivity. Barring sensitivity, you will also need to figure out your video settings. And although I'm aware that every PC setup is different, I still want to give you some basic recommendations for certain settings that may help you out later down the road. First things first, make sure you turn VSync off, as this can lead to severe input lag. I also recommend you turn on multi-threaded rendering, as this can help performance for higher-end CPUs. For the rest of the video settings, I recommend you mess with them while you're in the tutorial to see what gives you the best visibility for your monitor and your PC setup, as well as the best overall looking experience for you. Now that all your settings are in order, let's talk about the game. When you first get into the hub world, you'll be greeted by Badam the bartender. I love Badam the bartender. He will give you a list of basic tasks to do in order to get you more familiar with the hub world, as well as what to expect on the ground when you first join your game. He will give you some basic gear as well as some very important information, so make sure you're paying attention to everything Badam has to say. But let's talk about some things that Badam may not mention that I wish I knew before going into my first game. Overall, there are two ways to progress in the Cycle Frontier. The first of which being by leveling up the factions by completing their campaigns and contracts they give you throughout your playtime. By leveling up your factions, you will be able to purchase higher tier weapons with K-marks that allow you to kill higher level AI mobs, as well as kill higher leveled players with higher tier gear. As you start to kill higher tier monsters and get their materials, you will begin to see the second kind of progression that the Cycle Frontier offers, which is crafting. While higher tier weapons can be bought directly from the factions for K-marks, high tier armor, meds, and attachments all have to be crafted at the gear printer using items found in-game and farmed off mobs. And with no type of flea market, you have to find all these materials yourself, and you can't just go out and buy them. It's a dynamic that makes the Cycle Frontier interesting, as well as gives the player a reason to continue dropping into the planet. Another key component about the Cycle Frontier is the way in which matches are created and run. Unlike a lot of other games, instead of waiting for a certain number of players to be queuing and then gather those players and then launch a server for you all to play on, the Cycle Frontier has a set of constantly running servers that the players drop in and extract out of. This means that when you queue up for a game, the game looks through already running servers and drops you in mid-match to one with a player slot open. This keeps matchmaking times super short, and by short, I mean I don't think I've ever waited more than about 5 seconds to find a game. But with this system, keep in mind two things. First, players already in the game can see your drop pod fall down to the planet, and if they're close enough, could potentially rush your drop location for a fight. The second thing to keep in mind is that there is a maximum number of players per server dependent on the map. During the game, each server goes through two different cycles of gameplay: the normal day and the storm. During the normal day, players can drop onto and extract from the planet as normal. However, after some time, the planet will start to get foggy as the clouds in the sky start to get dense, and from there, players currently on the map will be given a 5-minute and a 60-second warning about the storm. When the storm hits, everything becomes dark and visibility becomes very difficult. Players can no longer spawn into the match, nor can players in the match extract. On top of this, Every 10 seconds or so, a lightning bolt will charge over your location and strike, dealing a ton of damage. These strikes can be avoided by either moving quickly or staying indoors. Keep in mind, though, that there are certain crafting and contract items that can only come from the storm, so at some point, you're gonna have to stay for it. The Cycle Frontier offers a fairly basic gear set from armor to weapons to backpacks and even some consumables. The first thing to understand is that every piece of equipment in the game has a rarity value. This value determines not only the difficulty to find or craft, but it also determines the strength of the item. While higher tier armor has an increased armor rating, helping you take less damage, the higher tier weapons have an increased penetration value, helping you pierce through higher armor ratings as well as higher tier mobs. But let's go back to the armor. Beyond simple rarity, there are 3 types of armor in each rarity: the normal shield, the restoration shield, and the tactical shield. The normal shield provides no extra buffs, but has the highest level of armor rating. The restoration shield provides a bit of health regen at the cost of a couple points of armor rating. And the tactical shield provides the wearer with a bit of extra stamina, also at the cost of a few armor rating points. Make sure you always have at least a set of basic armor before you deploy. I can't tell you how many times I've seen people forget a helmet. A lot of the gear in the Cycle Frontier is fairly self-explanatory, but there are a couple more tips that I'll give. Make sure you always bring meds. And while all med kits will heal a user to full health, higher tier med kits will have a shorter use time. And the opposite goes for stims. And while they all have the same use time, the higher tier stims will heal much more health. How many meds you bring will always depend on how you like to play, and I'll leave you to discover that on your own. But I personally will either bring 10 stims or 5 stims in a med kit. Last thing I'll mention is about ammo. Similar to meds, how much you bring is highly dependent on how you are going to play, but my general advice is to bring much more than you think you will need. For most weapons, I bring about 2 full stacks of ammo, but that will increase or decrease based on the fire rate of the weapon I'm using, as well as what I'm planning to do in the match. If I'm going in to kill crushers, I'm going to bring much more ammo than if I'm going in for a quick contract or 2. Speaking of killing stuff, let's go over some of the basic AI, starting with the most basic, Striders. The Striders are simple 2-legged creatures that, when provoked, will chase you and lunge at you when they're close enough, dealing some damage. They are the weakest of the mobs and can usually be killed with just a couple bullets to its head. Next to group of Striders, you will often see a Rattler or 2. These bug-looking creatures have 2 attacks. When provoked from up close, the Rattler will lunge at you, dealing a bit more damage than the Strider attack. But when provoked at a distance, the Rattler will charge up a ranged spit that travels in a straight line and will do a ton of damage if you sit in the beam. But because the Rattler will lock onto you before it starts the attack, the best way to avoid it is to move sideways out of the way right before the Rattler finishes his charge up. The Rattlers also have a weak spot in the head/neck area, and depending on the gun, could take a couple mags to kill, but is still manageable by pretty much every weapon in the game. In some areas of the maps, you will also find blast ticks and acid ticks. These ticks will chase you down and explode when they get close, dealing massive damage. But again, their charge-up phase is just long enough for you to get out of the way of the explosion by sprinting away. Similar to Striders, they also go down with just a couple bullets, but it's important to note that if you shoot the top of them, they will explode instantly. If you see people fighting them, you could get a ton of surprise damage on them by shooting the ticks. Now, in a huge step up from everything else, and the first mob that will prove to be difficult, we have Jeff, or Marauders if you're lame, are a huge step up from Rattlers and usually requires rare weapons or better to take down. Luckily, if you don't have the gear to fight them, they are fairly easy to run away from. Jeffs have a few attacks, the first of which is essentially a poop launcher from his mouth. Yep, you heard me right. They fling a giant ball of poop towards your location from their mouth. This poop does impact damage, as well as damage over time if you stand in the residue that it leaves behind. Luckily, this projectile attack is pretty slow and easy to avoid by moving. Jeff also has a melee attack where he will sprint towards you if you are close enough and double swing, doing a fairly large amount of damage. You can avoid this melee swing by sprinting directly away, but you'll have to work on the timing to be consistent with it. Jeff also has a weak spot in his open mouth, so in order to kill him, wait for him to open his mouth and then blast away at it. Last, but certainly not least, are the Crushers. These behemoths are only found in Crescent Falls as of this video, and typically require a group of heavily geared players to take out. Similar to Jeff, they have a ranged attack where they will throw a giant ball of dirt at you, and a melee attack where they will chase you around for, a couple of years. Crushers also have a weak spot in their back and in their knees that they will only show periodically. Crushers deal massive damage, but they do drop some very coveted resources for high-level crafting. Anyway, that's all I had for you guys today. Hopefully something that I said was useful. If you have any additional comments or questions, you can obviously leave them down below. Don't forget to subscribe, as there are actually going to be a lot more The Cycle Frontier content to come out soon. I'm a fork, and I don't know how to end a video.